The story of humanity's transformation from stone to metal begins not with thunder and fire, but with a quiet discovery in the highlands of ancient Anatolia. Picture a craftsman some 7,000 years ago, pausing in the midst of their work with stone tools, noticing something peculiar about certain green-tinged rocks scattered across the landscape. These weren't ordinary stones. When struck, they didn't shatter into sharp fragments like flint or obsidian. Instead, they deformed, bent, reshaped themselves under the hammer's blow. This simple observation would cascade through millennia, fundamentally altering the trajectory of human civilization. Before we embark on this extraordinary journey through time, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. By subscribing and turning on notifications, you'll never miss our deep dives into history's most fascinating transformations. Your support helps us continue bringing these stories to life, so please take a moment to click that subscribe button now. Thank you for being part of our community of history enthusiasts. Now, imagine yourself transported back to the world of 5500 BCE. The Great Pyramids of Egypt won't rise for another 3,000 years. Writing hasn't been invented. Yet across the ancient world, from the Anatolian highlands to the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, communities are experiencing transformations that will echo through every generation that follows. The copper they're beginning to work with possesses properties that seem almost magical compared to the materials they've relied upon for countless generations. Unlike stone, copper can be worked cold or hot. Unlike wood or bone, it maintains sharp edges through repeated use. Unlike obsidian, it doesn't shatter when dropped. This metal opens possibilities that previous materials simply couldn't offer. The archaeological sites we'll explore tonight represent more than just ancient settlements. They're windows into moments when human society stood at technological crossroads, when decisions made about resource exploitation, trade relationships, and social organization would shape the development of entire civilizations. At Catalhoyuk and Keonu in Anatolia, we'll witness the earliest experiments with copper working. In the spectacular burials of Varna on Bulgaria's Black Sea coast, we'll encounter wealth accumulation on a scale previously unimaginable, with grave goods containing more gold than existed in all other contemporary sites combined. Along the rivers of Mesopotamia, we'll observe how temple institutions coordinated irrigation systems and metallurgical production, creating administrative structures that would define urban civilization for millennia. As our journey continues, we'll travel to the Indus Valley, where the Harappan civilization achieved standardization and urban planning that wouldn't be matched until Roman times. We'll stand at the strategic crossroads of Troy, controlling maritime traffic through the Dardanelles Strait. We'll venture into the high alpine passes where territorial conflicts over copper sources turned deadly, as evidenced by the remarkable preservation of Otzi the Iceman, who died with an arrowhead in his shoulder, his valuable copper axe left mysteriously beside his frozen body. And we'll witness the fortified settlements of Iberia, where communities developed sophisticated defensive architecture to protect their control over mineral wealth. Throughout this exploration, we'll see how copper technology didn't simply provide better tools. It fundamentally restructured social relationships, created new forms of economic organization, enabled territorial expansion, and generated wealth disparities that reshaped human communities. The metal that could be shaped by hammering also shaped human societies, creating specialists who controlled technical knowledge, merchants who coordinated long-distance trade, warriors who wielded superior weapons, and rulers who accumulated unprecedented wealth. The transition from copper to bronze that we'll witness toward our journey's end represents another transformative moment. The addition of tin to copper, creating bronze with superior hardness and durability, would require even more extensive trade networks, more complex social organization, and more sophisticated military technologies. This transition coincides with widespread social disruptions around 2200 BCE, including climate changes, population movements, and the collapse of long-established cultural systems. Yet from these disruptions emerged new forms of social organization that would characterize the Bronze Age civilizations of the second millennium BCE. So settle in for this extensive exploration of humanity's Copper Age. We'll move slowly through these remarkable civilizations, examining how metallurgical innovations intertwined with developments in agriculture, trade, warfare, and social organization. The story that emerges is one of human ingenuity and adaptation, of communities responding to environmental challenges and opportunities, of technologies that enabled both cooperation and conflict. It's a story that begins with curious craftsmen experimenting with unusual stones and culminates in complex civilizations spanning continents, connected by trade networks that distributed not only metal goods but also ideas, technologies, and cultural practices that would influence human development for thousands of years to come. The highlands of ancient Anatolia presented a landscape vastly different from the one we might imagine today. Around 5500 BCE, these elevated regions experienced a climate that was experiencing significant fluctuations, with temperatures that had begun their long descent from the post-glacial warming maximum. These climatic shifts created pressures on communities that had established themselves during the previous millennium's more favorable conditions. The paleoclimatic evidence drawn from lake sediments and ice cores reveals that around 5200 BCE, a notable cooling event occurred, what modern climatologists identify as the 5.2 kilo-year event. This temperature drop reduced growing seasons across much of Europe and Western Asia, forcing agricultural communities to develop more efficient methods for processing crops and hunting game. In this context of environmental stress and adaptation, the development of copper working technology takes on particular significance. At Keonu Tepesi, located near modern Diyarbakir in southeastern Turkey, archaeological excavations have uncovered some of the earliest evidence of systematic copper working anywhere in the world. The site, occupied from approximately 7250 to 6750 BCE, represents one of Anatolia's first sedentary farming villages. The houses at Keonu were substantial structures, indicating a community that had moved beyond temporary seasonal camps to establish permanent settlement. Within these dwellings and in associated work areas, archaeologists discovered copper beads, pins, and small tools that display clear evidence of cold hammering techniques. The craftsmen who created these objects had discovered that native copper, found as nuggets weathered from their original veins by millennia of geological processes, could be shaped through repeated striking with stone hammers. This cold hammering process represents humanity's first step into metallurgy, though calling it metallurgy might seem premature. The craftsmen weren't smelting or casting objects. They were treating copper much as they might treat soft stone, using percussion techniques similar to those employed in flint knapping. Yet even this limited approach revealed copper's unique properties. Unlike stone, which fractures along predictable planes, copper deforms plastically. Strike it repeatedly and it flattens, spreads, takes new shapes. But there's a complication that these early metalworkers discovered through experience: work hardening. As copper is hammered, its crystalline structure changes, making it increasingly brittle. Eventually, continued hammering will cause the metal to crack and fragment. The solution to this problem required another discovery: annealing. By heating work-hardened copper and allowing it to cool slowly, craftsmen could restore its malleability, enabling further shaping. Whether the Keonu metalworkers understood this process or not remains uncertain from the archaeological evidence, but the presence of hearths near copper working areas suggests they may have experimented with heat treatment. Further west, at Catalhoyuk near modern Konya, a settlement of extraordinary size and sophistication provides crucial insights into how specialized craft production was beginning to reshape social organization during this period. Catalhoyuk, occupied from approximately 7100 to 5700 BCE, covered an area of about 13 hectares and housed an estimated population that fluctuated between 3,500 and 800 people at different phases of its occupation. Recent scholarship has revised earlier population estimates, suggesting that between 600 and 800 people lived there during an average year in the settlement's middle phase around 6700 to 6500 BCE. What made Catalhoyuk remarkable wasn't just its size but its organization. The settlement consisted of densely packed mud brick houses accessed through roof openings rather than ground-level doors. Residents moved across the settlement by walking on rooftops and descending through openings into their homes. This architectural arrangement created interesting social dynamics. Unlike settlements with streets and public spaces, Catalhoyuk forced constant interaction as residents traversed shared roof spaces. Within these houses, archaeological evidence reveals increasingly sophisticated craft specialization. Certain households contained obsidian tool manufacturing areas, while others specialized in textile production or pottery making. And in some houses, copper working tools and debris indicate that metallurgical knowledge was becoming concentrated within specific families or lineages. This concentration of technical expertise represents a crucial social development. When technical knowledge becomes specialized and heritable, it creates new forms of social differentiation based on control of production rather than simply control of agricultural land or hunting territories. The copper objects produced at Catalhoyuk and similar sites served multiple functions that extended beyond simple utility. Yes, copper awls proved superior to bone needles for leather working. Copper knives maintained edges longer than obsidian blades when cutting fibrous plant materials. But copper objects also acquired social significance that transcended their practical applications. A copper pin or bead represented not just a decorative item but a connection to specialized knowledge, to trade networks that supplied raw materials, to social relationships that enabled access to finished goods. These objects began appearing in burials at Catalhoyuk, positioned with the deceased in ways that suggested they held both practical and symbolic importance. The environmental challenges facing these communities created strong incentives for technological innovation. The cooling climate meant shorter growing seasons and increased difficulty maintaining population levels that had grown during previous warmer periods. More efficient tools for harvesting, processing, and preparing food became not merely convenient but essential for community survival. Copper tools, despite requiring access to distant raw materials and specialized knowledge for production, offered performance advantages that justified the investment in obtaining them. A copper sickle could harvest grain more efficiently than its flint predecessor. Copper scrapers processed hides more effectively than bone tools. These practical advantages, combined with copper's malleability which allowed repair and reshaping, made metal tools increasingly valuable as communities faced resource constraints. The geological distribution of copper created new imperatives for long-distance exchange relationships. Unlike obsidian, which came from volcanic sources concentrated in specific regions, or flint, which was widely available in various forms, native copper occurred in limited locations where geological conditions had concentrated the metal near the surface. Many Anatolian settlements had no local access to copper sources, necessitating the establishment of trade relationships with communities living near deposits. This need for long-distance exchange stimulated the development of trade networks that would grow increasingly complex over subsequent centuries. At Ai Bunar in Bulgaria, archaeologists have documented one of Europe's earliest copper mines, with operations beginning around 5000 BCE. The mine shafts at this site extend over 10 meters below the surface, requiring timber supports to prevent collapse and coordinated labor to excavate or and remove waste rock. The scale of these operations indicates that mining had evolved beyond casual surface collection to become an organized activity requiring planning, coordination, and sustained effort. Mining expeditions would have needed to be organized, with groups of workers traveling to the site, remaining there for extended periods while excavating and processing or, then transporting the processed material back to settlements where it could be distributed to craftsmen. This organization of mining operations created new forms of social complexity. Who coordinated these expeditions? Who decided how extracted or would be distributed? Who controlled access to mining locations? The archaeological evidence doesn't provide direct answers to these questions for the 5th millennium BCE, but the existence of organized mining operations implies social structures capable of mobilizing labor, managing resources, and allocating products. These capabilities would become increasingly important as metallurgical production intensified in subsequent periods. The expansion of trade networks during this period is evidenced by the appearance of copper objects with distinctive regional styles at sites separated by hundreds of kilometers. Different communities developed their own metallurgical traditions while maintaining contact with neighboring groups. This combination of regional identity and interregional exchange created a cultural landscape where local innovation and broader diffusion occurred simultaneously. A distinctive style of copper pin might originate in one region but gradually spread to others through trade relationships, gift exchange, or movement of craftsmen. These processes of cultural transmission would become increasingly important as metallurgical knowledge spread beyond Anatolia and the Balkans to encompass wider regions of Europe and Asia. The establishment of long-distance trade also necessitated the development of systems for managing exchange relationships. Standardized weights began appearing at sites across the region, indicating that trade had become sufficiently regular to require consistent measurement systems. These weights, carefully shaped from polished stone, represented an early form of commercial regulation. If copper was being traded by weight, then having agreed-upon standards became essential for maintaining trust in exchange relationships. The appearance of these standards reflects an important transition from casual, irregular exchange to more systematic trading relationships. As we observe these developments in Anatolia and the Balkans between 5500 and 4500 BCE, we're witnessing the establishment of technological and social foundations that would support increasingly complex developments in the subsequent millennium. The basic techniques of cold hammering and annealing had been established. Mining operations were extracting or systematically. Trade networks connected communities across vast distances. craft specialization was creating new forms of social differentiation. These foundations would prove crucial for the remarkable developments that would follow in the Balkan Copper Age florescence, when the Black Sea coastal regions would witness unprecedented accumulations of wealth and the creation of some of Europe's most spectacular prehistoric burials. The period between 4500 and 4000 BCE witnessed transformations across the Balkan region that challenged every previous assumption about the social and economic capabilities of prehistoric European communities. The settlements that emerged during these centuries achieved population densities and organizational sophistication that wouldn't be matched in Europe for thousands of years. This florescence occurred simultaneously across multiple cultural zones, suggesting that broader environmental, economic, or social factors were enabling these remarkable developments. The Cucuteni-Tripilia culture, named after archaeological sites in Romania and Ukraine, achieved demographic concentrations that seem almost impossible for societies lacking writing, formal bureaucracies, or centralized political authorities. At Taljanki in central Ukraine, magnetometer surveys and excavations have revealed a settlement covering over 335 hectares with an estimated peak population of approximately 15,000 inhabitants around 4100 BCE. To put this in perspective, this single prehistoric settlement housed more people than most European cities would contain until the medieval period. The site's layout, reconstructed through careful archaeological investigation, shows over 1,600 individual structures arranged in concentric rings around a central plaza. This arrangement wasn't random or organic but reflected careful planning that allocated specific areas for different activities and community functions. Each concentric ring at Taljanki contained specialized quarters where different craft activities took place. Metallurgy, pottery production, and textile manufacturing occupied distinct sectors of the settlement, suggesting an economic organization that had moved far beyond household-level production. The houses themselves demonstrate sophisticated construction techniques. Built using wattle and daub methods with timber frameworks, these structures typically measured 8 to 12 meters in length and contained multiple rooms with specialized functions. Ground floors served as workshops and storage areas, while upper levels provided living quarters for extended families. Many houses contained purpose-built kilns for pottery firing, indicating that ceramic production had become a household-level industry practiced by numerous families rather than a specialized craft limited to a few individuals. The pottery produced by Cucuteni-Tripilia craftsmen represents one of prehistoric Europe's most sophisticated ceramic traditions. The distinctive vessels, characterized by intricate spiral and geometric patterns painted in black and red on cream-colored backgrounds, required multiple firing stages and precise temperature control to achieve their characteristic appearance. The complexity of these decorations suggests that pottery had transcended purely functional purposes to become a medium for artistic expression and cultural identity. The standardization of vessel forms across multiple sites indicates that production followed established patterns, possibly controlled by craft guilds or family workshops that maintained consistent quality standards. The industrial scale of pottery production at these settlements exceeded anything seen elsewhere in prehistoric Europe. Excavations at Nebelivka in Ukraine uncovered pottery kilns capable of firing hundreds of vessels simultaneously, while refused deposits contain millions of ceramic fragments representing thousands of complete vessels discarded over the settlement's occupation period. Chemical analysis of clay sources indicates that raw materials were transported from quarries located up to 50 kilometers away, requiring organized procurement systems and possibly specialized transport teams. While the Cucuteni-Tripilia settlements were achieving unprecedented demographic concentrations in the interior regions, the Black Sea coastal areas witnessed the emergence of the Varna culture, which would push metallurgical innovation to levels that surpassed contemporary developments anywhere else in the world. The Varna necropolis, accidentally discovered by excavator-operator Rachel Marinov in October 1972, has become one of archaeology's most significant discoveries, fundamentally changing our understanding of prehistoric social organization and wealth accumulation. The Varna cemetery, dating to approximately 4600 to 4200 BCE, contained 294 graves that revealed a society with stark social stratification. Many burials contained minimal grave goods, perhaps only simple pottery vessels or stone tools. Some remained completely empty, cenotaphs marking symbolic graves without human remains. But a subset of graves contained wealth that beggars description. The cemetery yielded over 3,000 gold artifacts with a combined weight of approximately 6 kilograms. To contextualize this remarkable concentration, The gold found at Varna exceeds the combined weight and number of all gold artifacts found in all other excavated sites worldwide dating to the same millennium, including sites in Mesopotamia and Egypt. The most spectacular burial, designated Grave 43, contained the remains of a middle-aged male accompanied by over 990 gold objects totaling more than 1.5 kilograms of precious metal. The assemblage included a gold-hafted copper axe, gold appliques that once decorated clothing, and numerous gold ornaments that would have created a spectacular visual display during funerary rituals. The technical sophistication demonstrated in these objects indicates that Varna's goldsmiths had achieved mastery levels requiring generations of accumulated expertise. The gold diadem from Grave 4, weighing over 200 grams, exemplifies the technical capabilities these craftsmen had developed. The piece consists of multiple components joined using techniques requiring precise temperature control and timing. Decorative elements include raised bosses created through repoussé work, intricate filigree details, and surface treatments that enhance the metal's natural luster. X-ray fluorescence analysis reveals that the gold contains trace amounts of silver and copper, suggesting that craftsmen understood how these natural inclusions affected the metal's working properties and final appearance. The Varna goldsmiths developed innovative techniques for creating hollow objects that maximized visual impact while conserving precious metal. The gold-hafted axes found in several graves consist of thin gold sheets carefully shaped around wooden cores, creating the appearance of solid gold implements while using relatively modest amounts of raw material. This approach demonstrates not only technical sophistication but economic calculation, as craftsmen balanced aesthetic requirements against material constraints. Beyond the famous cemetery, the broader Varna culture encompassed numerous settlements where everyday metallurgical activities took place. At Durankulak, located on Bulgaria's northern coast, archaeologists uncovered workshops containing crucibles, tuyères, and slag deposits indicating regular copper and gold processing. The workshop areas were positioned near the settlement's periphery, possibly to minimize fire risks to residential areas, but remained integrated into the community's daily activities rather than being isolated in specialized industrial zones. The social implications of the wealth concentration visible at Varna are profound and troubling from modern perspectives. The cemetery provides clear evidence that Varna society had moved far beyond the relatively egalitarian social structures that characterized earlier agricultural communities. Some individuals controlled resources that enabled them to commission or acquire gold objects whose production required enormous investments of skilled labor and rare materials. The presence of cenotaphs, symbolic graves containing rich assemblages but no human remains, suggests that some individuals had achieved such high status that their social position could be commemorated even in their absence, perhaps when they died far from home or when their bodies couldn't be recovered for burial. The emergence of this extreme social stratification raises questions about the social mechanisms that enabled and legitimized such inequality. What made some individuals or families worthy of burial with kilogram quantities of gold while others received simple graves or none at all? The archaeological evidence suggests multiple possible sources of elite status. Control over metal trade appears to have been one pathway to wealth. The Varna region had access to copper sources in the nearby mountains and strategic position on trade routes connecting the Danube basin with the Black Sea. Families or individuals who controlled these trade relationships could accumulate wealth through their intermediary position in exchange networks. Another pathway to elite status may have involved religious authority. The association between metalworking and ritual in many ancient societies suggests that control over metallurgical knowledge might have carried spiritual significance beyond its economic importance. Shamans or priests who could transform or into metal through fire might have been seen as wielding supernatural powers that justified their elevated social position. Military prowess provides another potential explanation for status differentiation. The copper weapons found in elite burials show evidence of actual combat use, suggesting that successful warriors accumulated prestige and wealth through their military capabilities. In an increasingly competitive environment where communities vied for control over resources and territories, effective military leaders would have been valuable assets worth rewarding generously. The trade networks that supplied Varna with materials and connected it to distant communities extended across vast distances. Obsidian from Aegean sources flowed northward into the Balkans, while Balkan copper objects appeared in contexts as far away as the Po Valley in southern France. The movement of these goods required organized transport systems and established exchange relationships that could guarantee safe passage through multiple territorial boundaries. Mediterranean spondylus shells found in Varna graves may have served as primitive currency, facilitating trade by providing a portable store of value recognizable across different cultural groups. The coordination required for such extensive trade networks implies organizational capabilities that extended beyond individual merchant voyages. How were disputes between trading partners from different cultural groups resolved? Who guaranteed the safety of merchants traveling through unfamiliar territories? What mechanisms existed for establishing trust between communities that might have no prior relationship? The archaeological evidence doesn't provide direct answers, but the functioning of these networks required some form of commercial law or customary practice that enabled peaceful exchange even between potentially hostile groups. Around 4200 BCE, signs of stress began appearing across Balkan Copper Age societies. At numerous Cucutini Tripilia settlements, archaeologists have documented episodes of deliberate house burning followed by abandonment rather than rebuilding. The reasons for these burning episodes remain debated, with explanations ranging from ritual practices marking the end of occupation to defensive measures against approaching enemies. Environmental factors may have contributed to destabilization. Paleoclimatic data indicates that the 4.2 kilo-year event brought cooler temperatures and reduced precipitation that would have stressed agricultural systems adapted to previous warmer conditions. Whatever the causes, the demographic collapse that affected Balkan settlements during this period was dramatic and widespread. The mega-settlements of the Cucutini Tripilia culture disappeared completely, and Varna itself appears to have been abandoned around 4000 BCE. Sites that had supported thousands of inhabitants were left empty, with populations either dispersing to smaller settlements or migrating to entirely different regions. This collapse marked the end of Europe's first experiment with urban-scale communities, and similar population concentrations wouldn't reappear in the region until the Roman period, thousands of years later. While European communities grappled with the dramatic rise and fall of their Copper Age megasettlements, developments in Mesopotamia were following an entirely different trajectory that would establish patterns of urban civilization destined to endure for millennia. The Ubaid period, spanning from approximately 5500 to 3500 BCE, witnessed the gradual evolution of societies that would create the world's first true cities, complete with monumental architecture, complex bureaucracies, and sophisticated irrigation systems that transformed barren alluvial plains into productive agricultural landscapes. The earliest Ubaid settlements emerged in the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers created a landscape of channels, wetlands, and seasonal flooding that presented both challenges and opportunities for human settlement. Eridu, one of the earliest and most important Ubaid centers, began as a modest farming village around 5400 BCE. Archaeological excavations at Eridu have revealed 18 successive building phases spanning nearly 2 millennia, documenting a continuous process of growth and architectural innovation that transformed the site from a small village into a substantial proto-urban center. The transformation visible at Eridu reflects broader changes in Mesopotamian society that distinguished it from contemporary developments elsewhere. Unlike the Balkan settlements which appear to have grown rapidly and then collapsed, Mesopotamian communities developed gradually through incremental innovations in technology, social organization, and environmental management. This gradual development would prove more sustainable, establishing foundations that would support Mesopotamian civilization through multiple millennia. The key to Mesopotamia's sustained growth lay in the development of irrigation systems that could harness the annual floods of the Tigris and Euphrates while providing year-round water access for agriculture and craft production. The rivers of southern Mesopotamia present particular challenges for irrigation. Unlike the Nile with its predictable annual flooding, the Tigris and Euphrates flood at unpredictable times and with variable intensity. Their floods often come in late spring when growing crops are most vulnerable to inundation. Managing these rivers required engineering capabilities and social organization far exceeding what was needed for simple rainfall agriculture. At sites like Uar and Uruk, archaeologists have traced canal systems extending dozens of kilometers from the main river channels, complete with distribution gates, settling basins and drainage channels that prevented soil salinization. The construction of these systems required not only technical expertise but sophisticated social organization. Multiple communities had to coordinate their efforts to maintain shared infrastructure and allocate water rights fairly among different users. The labor requirements for construction and maintenance created new forms of social organization that differed markedly from the kinship-based systems that had governed earlier agricultural communities. Archaeological evidence suggests that temple complexes served as organizational centers for these irrigation activities, with religious authorities taking responsibility for managing the practical aspects of irrigation agriculture. This integration of religious and economic authority would become a defining characteristic of Mesopotamian civilization. The temple wasn't merely a place of worship but a comprehensive institution that coordinated agricultural production, managed craft manufacturing, organized long-distance trade, and stored surplus production that could buffer communities against harvest failures. Copper working evolved significantly within this context of increasing social complexity and technological innovation. The Ubaid period witnessed the establishment of specialized workshops at sites like Eridu and Tel Weli where craftsmen developed new techniques for smelting, casting, and finishing metal objects. These workshops were typically located near temple complexes, suggesting that metallurgical production had acquired religious significance beyond its purely economic functions. This association between metalwork and religious authority would become a defining feature of Mesopotamian civilization, with temples serving as centers for technological innovation and craft specialization. The copper objects produced in Ubaid workshops displayed technical sophistication surpassing contemporary work elsewhere in the Near East. Excavations have yielded copper axes, chisels, and ornamental objects showing evidence of advanced casting techniques, including use of complex molds that could produce objects with intricate surface details. Craftsmen had mastered the art of controlling metal composition, creating bronze-like alloys by adding arsenic or tin to copper, producing harder and more durable tools than pure copper alone. The workshop areas at Ubaid sites reveal the scale and organization of metallurgical production. At Tel Sawan in central Mesopotamia, archaeologists uncovered a copper working installation that included multiple furnaces, extensive slag deposits, and hundreds of finished and partially completed objects. The workshop's layout suggests that production followed standardized procedures, with different areas designated for specific stages of the manufacturing process. Raw materials were processed in one sector, while casting, finishing, and quality control took place in adjacent areas under the supervision of master craftsmen. The demand for copper objects during the Ubaid period extended far beyond utilitarian tools to encompass a wide range of decorative and ceremonial items. Temple inventories reconstructed from later cuneiform texts, but likely reflecting earlier practices, included copper vessels, figurines, and architectural elements that served religious functions. The copper objects found in temple contexts include not only ritual implements but also tools and weapons apparently manufactured under temple supervision and distributed to community members for specific purposes. The expansion of copper working created new demands for raw materials that couldn't be satisfied by local sources. Mesopotamia's alluvial plains contain no metal deposits, forcing communities to establish trade relationships with copper-producing regions in Anatolia, the Zagros Mountains, and the Arabian Peninsula. These trade networks became increasingly complex during the Ubaid period, with archaeological evidence indicating regular contact between Mesopotamian settlements and communities hundreds of kilometers away. The Ubaid expansion, as archaeologists term the spread of Mesopotamian cultural influences during this period, extended across much of the northern Persian Gulf region and into the Zagros foothills. Sites like Tepe Gora in northern Iraq and Susa in southwestern Iran show clear evidence of Mesopotamian influence in their pottery styles, architectural techniques, and metallurgical practices. This cultural expansion appears to have been driven primarily by trade relationships rather than military conquest, as communities adopted Mesopotamian innovations while maintaining their own distinct cultural identities. The organization of long-distance trade required administrative capabilities that pushed Mesopotamian societies toward increasingly complex forms of social organization. Archaeological evidence suggests that temple authorities took responsibility for managing trade relationships, using their religious authority to guarantee the honesty of transactions and the quality of goods. The development of standardized weights and measures during this period reflects the need for consistent systems that could facilitate exchange relationships across cultural boundaries. Competition for control over trade routes and copper sources led to the first clear evidence of organized warfare in Mesopotamian history. The site of Tel Sawan, strategically located on the Tigris River north of Baghdad, was surrounded by a massive defensive wall during the late Ubaid period, complete with towers and gates that could control access to the settlement. The wall's construction required enormous labor investment and suggests that the community faced significant military threats from rival groups seeking to control river traffic and trade routes. Similar fortifications appeared at other strategic locations throughout Mesopotamia during this period, indicating that warfare had become a regular feature of intercommunity relations. At Tepe Gora, archaeologists uncovered evidence of violent destruction followed by rapid rebuilding, suggesting that the settlement experienced repeated attacks but possessed sufficient resources to recover from military setbacks. The presence of copper weapons, including spear points, axes, and mace heads in destruction layers, indicates that metallurgical innovations were being applied to military technology. The evidence for organized warfare during the Ubaid period includes not only fortifications and weapons but also changes in settlement patterns that reflect security concerns. Many communities relocated to defensible positions on elevated ground or constructed their buildings in compact arrangements that could be more easily defended. The temple complexes that emerged during the Ubaid period served as much more than religious centers, functioning as integrated economic and administrative institutions that coordinated multiple aspects of community life. The temple at Eridu, rebuilt and expanded numerous times during the Ubaid period, eventually covered over 1,000 square meters and included not only religious spaces but also workshops, storage rooms, and administrative offices where temple personnel managed agricultural production, craft manufacturing, and trade relationships. The economic role of temples extended to the management of metallurgical production, with temple authorities controlling access to raw materials, supervising workshop activities, and distributing finished products according to community needs and religious requirements. The administrative capabilities of temple institutions during the Ubaid period laid groundwork for the development of writing systems that would emerge in later periods. While true writing had not yet appeared, archaeological evidence suggests that temple personnel used various recording systems to track production, distribution, and trade activities. Clay tokens found at Ubaid sites may have served as counting devices or record-keeping tools, while cylinder seals began to appear as methods for marking ownership and authenticating transactions. The social stratification that characterized Ubaid society is clearly visible in burial practices, showing marked differences in wealth and status between different individuals and families. Cemetery excavations have revealed graves ranging from simple interments with minimal grave goods to elaborate burials containing dozens of copper objects, imported materials, and other luxury items. The richest graves often contained copper vessels, weapons, and ornaments that would have required significant resources to acquire, suggesting that some families had achieved substantial wealth through their control of trade relationships or craft production. By the end of the Ubaid period around 3500 BCE, Mesopotamian communities had established the technological, social, and economic foundations that would support the emergence of the world's first urban civilizations. The innovations in copper working, irrigation technology, and social organization that characterized this period created new possibilities for human achievement that would be realized in the subsequent Uruk period, when Mesopotamian cities would grow to unprecedented size and complexity, establishing patterns of urban life that would influence human development for millennia to come. The technological and social innovations that had transformed Mesopotamian society during the Ubaid period created ripple effects that extended far beyond the alluvial plains of the Tigris and Euphrates. As Mesopotamian cities consolidated their control over regional trade networks and developed increasingly sophisticated metallurgical techniques, communities across Anatolia found themselves positioned at the intersection of expanding commercial relationships that would fundamentally reshape the ancient world. Troy, perched on a limestone ridge overlooking the Dardanelles Strait, emerged during this period as one of Anatolia's most significant commercial centers. The earliest substantial levels of Troy, dating to approximately 3000 BCE, reveal a fortified settlement covering roughly 9,000 square meters, protected by massive stone walls that incorporated sophisticated architectural techniques borrowed from both European and Near Eastern traditions. The settlement's builders constructed these fortifications using carefully fitted limestone blocks weighing several tons each, requiring coordinated labor efforts and engineering expertise that reflected the community's growing wealth and strategic importance. The strategic location of Troy gave it control over one of the ancient world's most important maritime choke points. The Dardanelles Strait, barely 1.5 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, created a natural bottleneck where communities could control shipping traffic between the Aegean and Black Seas. The difficulty in finding favorable winds to enter the Dardanelles meant that ancient sailing vessels often had to wait near Troy for appropriate conditions, creating opportunities for provisioning, trade, and the collection of tolls or tribute. This geographic advantage would prove crucial for Troy's prosperity throughout the Bronze Age. The houses within Troy demonstrate the prosperity that maritime commerce was bringing to Anatolian communities. Unlike simple rectangular structures that characterized most contemporary settlements, Trojan buildings featured complex multi-room layouts with stone foundations supporting timber-framed upper stories. Archaeological excavations have revealed hearths equipped with sophisticated ventilation systems, storage areas designed for bulk commodities, and workshop spaces where copper objects were manufactured using techniques that combined local traditions with innovations imported from distant regions. The metallurgical workshops at Troy produced objects displaying remarkable technical sophistication, including copper axes with complex hafting systems, ornamental pins with intricate decorative elements, and vessels that required advanced understanding of metal flow and cooling rates. Chemical analysis of copper artifacts from the site indicates that Trojan craftsmen were working with ores from multiple sources, including deposits in the Taurus Mountains to the south and the Pontic Ranges to the northeast. This diversity of raw materials suggests that Troy had established trade relationships spanning hundreds of kilometers, positioning the settlement as a hub for redistributing metals throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The development of maritime capabilities during this period required innovations that extended far beyond simple boat construction. Navigational techniques had to be developed that could guide vessels across open water without modern instruments, relying instead on careful observation of celestial movements, wind patterns, and coastal landmarks. The boats used for Mediterranean trade during this period, reconstructed from fragmentary archaeological remains and ethnographic parallels, typically measured 12 to 15 meters in length and featured shallow drafts that enabled navigation in both open waters and coastal shallows where trading activities often took place. The expansion of maritime trade created new demands for harbor infrastructure that transformed coastal settlements throughout the region. At Liman Tepe on the Turkish coast, archaeologists have uncovered stone-built quays and breakwater systems dating to this period, complete with mooring posts and storage facilities designed for handling bulk cargoes. The construction of these installations required engineering expertise that combined knowledge of local tidal patterns with understanding of stonework techniques derived from both architectural and metallurgical traditions. The prosperity generated by maritime commerce attracted attention from communities throughout Anatolia, leading to the establishment of numerous settlements positioned to take advantage of expanding trade opportunities. The most spectacular evidence of Anatolian prosperity during this period comes from the Arslan Tepe complex in eastern Turkey, where archaeological investigations have revealed one of the ancient world's earliest examples of monumental architecture associated with centralized political authority. The Arslan Tepe complex, constructed around 3350 BCE, covered over 1,000 square meters and featured elaborate decorative elements, including wall paintings, carved stone reliefs, and architectural details that required skilled craftsmen working under centralized direction. The building's layout included administrative areas equipped with clay seal impressions and standardized storage vessels, suggesting that the site's rulers had developed bureaucratic systems for managing economic activities across their territories. These administrative innovations parallel developments occurring in Mesopotamian cities but adapted to local conditions and cultural preferences. The evidence for centralized control at Arslan Tepe extends beyond architecture to encompass the management of metallurgical production on an unprecedented scale. Workshop areas within the complex contain furnaces capable of processing large quantities of copper ore, along with molds for producing standardized tool types that could be distributed throughout the region. Chemical analysis of slag deposits indicates that the site's metal workers were processing ores from multiple sources simultaneously, creating alloys with specific properties tailored for different applications. The administrative systems that emerged at Arslan Tepe included sophisticated methods for tracking production and distribution activities. Clay ceilings found throughout the complex bear impressions from cylinder seals depicting various animals, geometric patterns, and human figures that may have identified specific administrators or production units. The standardization of these sealing systems suggests that rulers had developed bureaucratic procedures that could manage complex economic relationships across extended territories. The concentration of wealth and power at sites like Arslan Tepe created new forms of social stratification that are clearly visible in the archaeological record. Elite burials from this period contain assemblages of copper objects, imported materials, and luxury goods that demonstrate the enormous resources that successful leaders could accumulate. At Alika Hoyuk, north of Ankara, royal tombs dating to around 2500 BCE contained copper and bronze vessels, weapons decorated with precious metals, and ceremonial standards that would have served as symbols of political authority during public ceremonies. The weapons found in these elite contexts reveal the military dimensions of emerging political competition in Anatolia. Copper and bronze axes, maces, and spear points show evidence of actual combat use, while their elaborate decorative elements suggest that they also served ceremonial functions during peacetime. The standardization of weapon types across multiple sites indicates that Anatolian communities were developing common military technologies, possibly through shared training traditions or alliance relationships. The expansion of Anatolian political entities led to increasing competition for control over trade routes and resource sources, creating conflicts that are documented in destruction layers at numerous sites throughout the region. The diplomatic relationships that developed between Anatolian polities created new forms of interregional cooperation that complemented the competitive dynamics of trade and warfare. Archaeological evidence suggests that communities established formal alliance systems that could provide mutual support during military crises while facilitating commercial relationships during peacetime. Standardized pottery styles and metallurgical techniques that appear simultaneously at distant sites may reflect these diplomatic connections as allied communities shared technological innovations and cultural practices. The influence of Anatolian commercial networks extended far beyond the immediate region, connecting communities across the eastern Mediterranean with resource sources and markets in both Europe and the Near East. Copper objects produced in Anatolian workshops have been found at sites throughout the Aegean, while Mesopotamian cylinder seals appear in Anatolian contexts, demonstrating the extensive reach of these trade relationships. The movement of these goods required sophisticated logistical capabilities that could coordinate shipping schedules, manage currency exchanges, and resolve disputes between merchants from different cultural backgrounds. The technological innovations that supported this expansion of trade included developments in metallurgy that produced increasingly sophisticated copper alloys. Anatolian craftsmen discovered that adding specific amounts of arsenic, tin, or antimony to copper could create metals with enhanced hardness, corrosion resistance, or working properties. These innovations required careful experimentation with ore sources and smelting techniques, suggesting that metallurgical knowledge was becoming increasingly specialized and closely guarded by master craftsmen. The social implications of these technological advances extended beyond simple improvements in tool quality to encompass fundamental changes in economic relationships and political power. Communities that controlled access to advanced metallurgical techniques could produce superior weapons and tools, giving them significant advantages in both military conflicts and commercial competition. The environmental challenges that affected Anatolian communities during this period included both natural disasters and human-induced changes that influenced settlement patterns and economic activities. Volcanic eruptions in central Anatolia deposited ash layers that are visible in archaeological contexts, while climate fluctuations affected agricultural productivity and water availability. These environmental pressures contributed to the competitive dynamics that characterized the period, as communities competed for access to the most productive agricultural areas and reliable water sources. The population growth that accompanied economic prosperity created new pressures on agricultural systems that required innovative solutions. Archaeological evidence indicates that Anatolian communities developed terracing systems, irrigation networks, and intensive cultivation techniques that could support larger populations than had been possible with earlier farming methods. These agricultural innovations required coordinated labor efforts and technical expertise that paralleled the organizational capabilities being developed for metallurgical production and long-distance trade. While Anatolian trading centers flourished as intermediaries in the expanding Mediterranean copper networks, the communities along the Nile River were developing their own distinctive approaches to metallurgy and social organization that would ultimately surpass their contemporaries in both scale and sophistication. The pre-dynastic period in Egypt, spanning roughly from 4000 to 3100 BCE, witnessed transformations that paralleled developments elsewhere in the ancient world while following uniquely Egyptian trajectories shaped by the river valley's distinctive geography, climate, and resource distribution. The earliest evidence of systematic copper exploitation in Egypt appears in the archaeological record around 3800 BCE, when communities in Upper Egypt began organizing expeditions to the eastern desert's copper deposits. These mining ventures represented a dramatic departure from the opportunistic collection of surface ores that had characterized earlier metallurgical activities. At Timna, located in what is now southern Israel but then within Egypt's sphere of influence, archaeologists have uncovered extensive mining installations featuring deep shafts, ore processing areas, and temporary settlements that housed hundreds of workers during active mining seasons. The organization of these mining expeditions required administrative capabilities that went far beyond anything previously seen in Egyptian society. Later inscriptions from pharaonic periods describe the logistical challenges involved in transporting work crews, tools, food supplies, and water across the desert to remote mining locations, then returning with processed ore and finished copper objects. The scale of these operations suggests that pre-dynastic Egyptian communities had developed sophisticated planning systems that could coordinate activities across vast distances and extended time periods. The copper deposits of the Eastern Desert presented both opportunities and challenges that shaped Egyptian metallurgical development. Unlike the easily accessible surface deposits that had supplied earlier copperworking communities, the Egyptian sources required deep excavation through hard rock formations. Mining crews used fire-setting techniques, heating rock faces with wood fires then quenching them with water to create fractures that could be exploited with copper and stone tools. The debris piles at these sites contained thousands of broken hammerstones, copper picks, and wooden tool handles that document the enormous labor investment required for ore extraction. The processing of copper ore at these remote locations required the transport of fuel, flux materials, and technical expertise across hundreds of kilometers of desert terrain. Archaeological excavations at mining sites have revealed sophisticated smelting installations with multiple furnaces, bellows systems, and slag disposal areas indicating continuous operation over extended periods. The furnaces themselves were constructed using local stone and clay, but their designs incorporated technical innovations that maximized heat retention and/or reduction efficiency. The Sinai Peninsula provided additional copper sources that would become increasingly important for Egyptian metallurgy. The deposits at Serabit el-Khathim and other Sinai locations contained high-quality ores, but the remote locations and harsh environmental conditions made exploitation extremely difficult. Egyptian mining expeditions to these areas required careful coordination with local Bedouin populations who controlled water sources and transportation routes. Archaeological evidence suggests that these relationships evolved from simple commercial exchanges to more complex arrangements that granted Egyptian authorities semi-permanent access to mining territories. The copper objects produced using ores from these distant sources display technical sophistication that reflects both the quality of raw materials and the expertise of Egyptian craftsmen. Tools and weapons found at pre-dynastic sites show evidence of advanced alloying techniques, with copper being combined with arsenic, antimony, and eventually tin to create metals with enhanced hardness and durability. The consistency of these alloy compositions across different sites suggests that Egyptian metallurgists had developed standardized procedures for ore processing and metal production. The role of copper tools in Egyptian construction projects became increasingly important as communities undertook more ambitious architectural endeavors. The mastaba tombs that emerged during the Gurzian period required precision cutting of stone blocks, excavation of underground chambers, and installation of heavy architectural elements that would have been impossible without metal tools. At Hierakonpolis, excavations of elite tombs have revealed copper chisels, saws, and drilling equipment that show clear signs of use in stonework activities. The technological foundations established during these early construction projects would prove crucial for later pyramid construction, though the pre-dynastic period saw only the initial development of these capabilities. The precision required for fitting stone blocks in mastaba construction demanded tools that could maintain sharp edges through extended use while providing the leverage necessary for working hard stone materials. Copper tools met these requirements in ways that their stone predecessors could not, enabling architectural innovations that would become hallmarks of Egyptian civilization. The social implications of these technological advances are clearly visible in the burial practices that characterize pre-dynastic Egyptian society. The distribution of copper objects in grave contexts reveals increasingly complex social hierarchies, with elite individuals being interred with assemblages of metal tools, weapons, and ornaments that demonstrated their elevated status. At Nakata, cemetery excavations have revealed graves containing dozens of copper objects alongside pottery, ivory carvings, and imported materials that reflect the deceased's participation in long-distance trade networks. The emergence of regional power centers during this period created competitive dynamics that drove further innovations in metallurgy and military technology. Hierakonpolis, located in Upper Egypt near the First Cataract, developed into a major political and commercial center whose rulers controlled access to Nubian gold sources and Eastern Desert copper deposits. The site's impressive archaeological remains include elaborate tombs, monumental architecture, and workshop areas where copper objects were produced on an industrial scale. Competition between Hierakonpolis and other regional centers, particularly Nakata in central Upper Egypt, created demands for superior weapons and military equipment that pushed metallurgical innovation in new directions. Copper mace heads, axes, and spear points from this period show evidence of sophisticated heat treatment techniques that enhanced their hardness and durability. The standardization of weapon designs across different sites suggests that military technology was becoming systematized, possibly through formal training programs or alliance relationships between allied communities. The gradual process of political unification that would culminate in the establishment of the First Dynastic period around 3100 BCE was facilitated by the military advantages that superior copper weapons provided to successful rulers. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout Upper Egypt documents episodes of violent conflict during the late pre-dynastic period, with destruction layers containing numerous copper weapons and evidence of defensive preparations. The communities that emerged victorious from these conflicts typically possessed larger quantities of metal weapons and more sophisticated metallurgical capabilities than their defeated rivals. The role of copper weaponry in establishing centralized authority extended beyond simple military superiority to encompass the symbolic and ceremonial functions that metal objects served in Egyptian society. The famous Narmer palette, commemorating the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, depicts the pharaoh wielding a mace that would have been made from copper or bronze. The ceremonial significance of metal weapons made them essential elements in the regalia of Egyptian rulers, who used them to demonstrate their divine authority and military prowess during public ceremonies. The administrative systems that emerged to manage copper production and distribution created new forms of bureaucratic organization that would become characteristic features of Egyptian civilization. Temple complexes served as centers for coordinating mining expeditions, processing raw materials, and distributing finished products according to religious and political priorities. The priests and administrators who managed these activities developed record-keeping systems that tracked production quantities, worker assignments, and distribution schedules with unprecedented precision. The integration of copper production with religious institutions reflected the sacred significance that Egyptians attributed to metallurgical processes. The transformation of raw ore into finished metal objects was understood as a divine act of creation that paralleled the cosmic processes through which the gods had created the world. This religious dimension of metallurgy gave temple authorities enormous influence over technological development and innovation, as they controlled access to both the practical knowledge and the sacred rituals required for successful metal production. The expansion of Egyptian influence during the late pre-dynastic period created new demands for copper objects that could serve diplomatic and commercial functions in addition to their military and ceremonial roles. Egyptian copper tools and weapons appear in archaeological contexts throughout the eastern Mediterranean and Nubia, demonstrating the extent of trade relationships that Egyptian rulers had established. These commercial connections provided access to raw materials, luxury goods, and technological innovations that enhanced Egypt's metallurgical capabilities. The workforce organization required for large-scale copper production created new forms of labor specialization that transformed Egyptian society. Mining expeditions required not only skilled miners and metallurgists but also support personnel including guards, transport workers, food preparers, and administrative staff. The coordination of these diverse activities required management systems that could allocate resources efficiently while maintaining security and productivity in challenging environments. The influence of copper technology on Egyptian artistic development is evident in the sophisticated decorative objects that appeared during the pre-dynastic period. Copper vessels, ornaments, and ceremonial objects display artistic sophistication that reflects both technical mastery and aesthetic innovation. The malleability of copper allowed craftsmen to create complex forms and surface decorations that would have been impossible with stone or ceramic materials, contributing to the development of distinctive Egyptian artistic traditions. While Egyptian rulers consolidated their control over copper sources in the Eastern Desert and Sinai Peninsula, an equally remarkable but fundamentally different civilization was emerging in the floodplains of the Indus River system. The Harappan civilization, spanning territories across modern Pakistan and northwestern India, developed urban planning concepts and metallurgical standardization that surpassed contemporary achievements elsewhere in the ancient world. Unlike the monument-building pharaohs of Egypt or the temple-centered administrators of Mesopotamia, the Harappan people created cities that prioritized functional efficiency, public health, and systematic organization over monumental display. The earliest Harappan settlements emerged around 3300 BCE in the fertile alluvial plains where the Indus River and its tributaries deposited rich sediments during annual floods. At Harappa itself, located in the Punjab region, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of planned urban development that began with careful selection of elevated ground that could remain habitable during flood seasons while maintaining access to river transport and agricultural areas. The site's founders constructed massive brick platforms that raised the city's core area several meters above the surrounding plain, creating foundations that could support dense urban construction while providing protection from seasonal flooding. The urban planning principles that governed Harappan city construction represented innovations that wouldn't be matched in sophistication until the Roman period. At Mohenjo-Daro, the civilization's largest known city, excavations have revealed a grid-pattern street system with major thoroughfares running north-south and east-west, intersected by smaller lanes that provided access to residential blocks. The main streets measured up to 10 meters in width, sufficient for wheeled traffic and large animal caravans, while maintaining consistent orientations that facilitated navigation and maximized air circulation during intense summer heat. The residential architecture of Mohenjo-Daro demonstrates the Harappan commitment to standardized construction techniques and public health considerations. Houses typically featured central courtyards surrounded by rooms of varying sizes, with flat roofs that could serve as additional living space during cooler seasons. The buildings were constructed using standardized fired bricks that measured precisely in a ratio of 1:2:4, creating modular construction elements that could be combined in various configurations while maintaining structural integrity. This standardization extended to architectural details, with doorways, windows, and wall thicknesses following consistent proportions across different neighborhoods. The most remarkable feature of Harappan urban planning was the sophisticated drainage and sanitation system that served every neighborhood within the major cities. Each house connected to covered drains that ran beneath the streets, carrying wastewater away from residential areas to collection points outside the city walls. The drains themselves were constructed using carefully fitted brick channels with removable stone covers that allowed for cleaning and maintenance. Inspection chambers at regular intervals permitted workers to clear blockages and monitor water flow, while settling tanks removed solid waste before liquid effluent was discharged into agricultural areas. The construction and maintenance of these drainage systems required administrative capabilities that could coordinate activities across entire urban populations. Archaeological evidence suggests that Harappan authorities established standardized procedures for waste disposal, water management, and street cleaning that were enforced throughout their territories. The uniformity of sanitation infrastructure across different Harappan cities indicates that these procedures were systematically implemented rather than developed independently by each community. The metallurgical workshops that served Harappan cities displayed the same commitment to standardization and quality control that characterized other aspects of their civilization. At Harappa, excavations have uncovered specialized metalworking areas containing furnaces designed for copper smelting, casting installations equipped with standardized molds, and finishing workshops where tools and ornaments received final surface treatments. The workshops were positioned near the city's periphery to minimize fire hazards while remaining integrated with residential and commercial districts through the street network. The copper tools produced in these workshops demonstrate remarkable consistency in design, dimensions, and manufacturing quality. Harappan axes, chisels, knives, and spear points followed patterns that appear with minimal variation at sites separated by hundreds of kilometers. This standardization suggests that Harappan craftsmen worked according to established specifications that were maintained through formal training systems or guild organizations that could ensure consistent quality across different production centers. Chemical analysis of Harappan copper objects reveals sophisticated understanding of alloy composition and its effects on tool performance. Craftsmen regularly produced bronze by adding tin to copper in proportions that optimized hardness and durability for specific applications. Agricultural tools typically contained lower tin percentages that maintained the malleability needed for field repairs, while weapons and cutting implements incorporated higher tin concentrations that enhanced edge retention and impact resistance. This systematic approach to alloy composition demonstrates technical expertise that rivaled contemporary developments in Mesopotamia and Egypt. The raw materials required for Harappan metallurgy came from sources distributed across the Indian subcontinent and beyond, necessitating trade networks that extended from the Hindu Kush Mountains to the Deccan Plateau. Copper ores were transported from deposits in Rajasthan and Baluchistan, while tin sources in Afghanistan supplied the materials needed for bronze production. The organization of these supply chains required administrative systems that could coordinate procurement, transportation, and quality control across vast distances and diverse geographical conditions. Archaeological evidence from Shorchagai, a Harappan trading post located in northern Afghanistan near lapis lazuli and tin sources, illustrates the extent and sophistication of these commercial networks. The site, positioned strategically along the Amu Darya River, contained warehouses for storing raw materials, workshops for processing ore, and residential areas for permanent trading personnel. The presence of standardized Harappan weights and measures at the site indicates that trade activities followed established procedures that could ensure fair exchanges and quality control. The weight and measurement systems used throughout Harappan territories represent one of the civilization's most remarkable achievements in standardization. Stone cubes found at sites across the Indus Valley follow a consistent binary progression, with weights increasing in ratios of 1-2-4-8-16, creating a mathematical system that could handle transactions of vastly different scales. The smallest weights, measuring less than 1 gram, were suitable for precious materials like gold and gems, while the largest examples could weigh several kilograms for bulk commodity transactions. The precision of these weight standards required manufacturing techniques that could achieve tolerances measured in fractions of grams. Harappan craftsmen created their weights using carefully selected stone materials that were shaped, polished, and tested to ensure accuracy. The consistency of these standards across different sites suggests that weight production was centrally controlled or regulated through systems that could verify accuracy and prevent counterfeiting. This level of standardization implies administrative capabilities that could maintain consistent commercial practices across territories spanning over 1 million square kilometers. The evidence for centralized authority in Harappan society extends beyond weight standards to encompass numerous aspects of urban planning and industrial production. The uniform brick sizes used in construction, the standardized pottery forms found at different sites, and the consistent street widths in different cities all suggest coordinated planning that transcended local community decisions. However, unlike contemporary civilizations in Egypt and Mesopotamia, Harappan society appears to have achieved this coordination without the monumental architecture or elaborate burial practices that typically indicate the presence of powerful rulers. The absence of palaces, temples, or royal tombs in Harappan cities has led archaeologists to propose various theories about the nature of political organization in this civilization. Some scholars suggest that authority was distributed among merchant guilds or craft organizations that could coordinate economic activities without requiring centralized political control. Others propose that religious or ideological systems provided the social cohesion necessary for maintaining consistent practices across different communities. The undeciphered Harappan script remains a crucial obstacle to understanding these political arrangements. The Harappan writing system appears on thousands of seals, pottery vessels, and bronze objects found throughout their territories, but despite decades of scholarly effort, the script remains undeciphered. The symbols, typically arranged in short sequences of 3 to 7 characters, appear to combine pictographic elements with more abstract signs that may represent phonetic values or grammatical markers. The brevity of most inscriptions suggests they may have served administrative functions, possibly recording ownership, quantities, or transaction details related to trade and production activities. The seals themselves provide important insights into Harappan administrative systems and commercial practices. Carved from steatite and fire to create durable surfaces, these seals feature distinctive animal motifs including bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, and mythical creatures that may have identified specific merchants, workshops, or administrative offices. The seals were used to mark clay tags attached to trade goods, creating a system for tracking ownership and authenticity during commercial transactions. The widespread distribution of identical seal designs across different Harappan sites indicates that these marking systems were recognized and accepted throughout their territories. The scale of copper production in Harappan cities required fuel supplies that placed significant demands on regional forest resources. Archaeological evidence indicates that Harappan metallurgists used wood charcoal for smelting operations, necessitating the transport of timber from distant forested regions to urban workshops. The organization of these fuel supply chains required administrative capabilities that could coordinate logging operations, transportation networks, and urban distribution systems. The environmental impact of these activities may have contributed to deforestation in areas surrounding major Harappan cities. The technological innovations developed by Harappan craftsmen included advances in furnace design that improved fuel efficiency and temperature control. Excavations at Lathal, a Harappan port city on the Arabian Sea coast, have revealed metallurgical installations with sophisticated air circulation systems that maximized combustion efficiency while minimizing fuel consumption. These furnaces incorporated ceramic tuyères that directed airflow precisely where needed, creating the high temperatures required for bronze production while reducing the quantities of charcoal needed for each smelting operation. The port facilities at Lathal demonstrate the maritime dimensions of Harappan trade networks and their integration with metallurgical production. The site features a massive brick-lined dock that could accommodate ocean-going vessels during high tide while providing protected anchorage during monsoon seasons. Warehouses adjacent to the dock contained copper ingots, finished metal tools and raw materials that were being prepared for export to trading partners throughout the Arabian Sea region. The discovery of Harappan seals at sites in Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf confirms that these maritime connections extended across vast distances. The decline of Harappan civilization around 1900 BCE remains one of archaeology's most puzzling problems, with various theories proposing climate change, river system alterations, or invasion by external groups as potential explanations. The archaeological evidence shows gradual abandonment of major cities rather than sudden destruction, suggesting that environmental or economic pressures may have made urban life unsustainable. The sophisticated metallurgical traditions and urban planning innovations developed by the Harappans would influence subsequent South Asian civilizations, though their specific achievements wouldn't be matched until much later periods. The sophisticated urban achievements of the Harappan civilization represented one trajectory of Copper Age development, but across the vast expanses of Europe, entirely different patterns were emerging that would fundamentally reshape the continent's cultural and technological landscape. While Harappan cities maintained their remarkable standardization through centralized administrative systems, European communities were experiencing a period of unprecedented mobility and cultural exchange that would distribute copperworking knowledge across distances that dwarfed even the extensive Harappan trade networks. The bell beaker phenomenon, beginning around 2800 BCE, represents one of prehistory's most remarkable examples of rapid cultural transmission across vast geographical distances. Within the span of just a few centuries, a distinctive material culture characterized by bell-shaped pottery vessels, copper daggers, stone wrist guards, and standardized ornamental sets appeared simultaneously across territories stretching from the Iberian Peninsula to the British Isles, from the Rhine Valley to the western Mediterranean islands. This cultural package didn't spread through gradual diffusion from neighboring communities but appeared suddenly at sites separated by thousands of kilometers, suggesting organized migration movements that carried both people and technological knowledge across the European continent. The pottery vessels that gave this culture its archaeological designation were far more than simple containers. These bell-shaped beakers, typically measuring 15 to 20 centimeters in height with distinctive inverted profiles and elaborate geometric decorations, required sophisticated ceramic techniques that combined aesthetic refinement with functional efficiency. The decorative patterns, created using comb-like tools before firing, followed standardized motifs that remained remarkably consistent across different regions while incorporating subtle local variations that suggest individual craftsmen working within established traditions. Chemical analysis of clay sources indicates that these vessels were not trade items manufactured in centralized workshops but were produced locally by craftsmen who had learned standardized techniques that could be replicated using available materials. This pattern of local production following shared traditions suggests that bell beaker culture spread through the movement of people carrying technical knowledge rather than through trade in finished goods. The craftsmen who created these vessels had undergone training that transmitted not only practical skills but also aesthetic standards and cultural values that remained consistent across vast distances. The copper objects associated with bell beaker assemblages demonstrate metallurgical capabilities that surpass contemporary European traditions while maintaining distinctive stylistic characteristics that set them apart from Mediterranean or Near Eastern products. The flat copper daggers found in bell beaker graves typically measured 8 to 15 centimeters in length, with tang hafting systems that required precise coordination between metalworkers and handle craftsmen. These weapons were not crude imitations of foreign prototypes but represented sophisticated understanding of copper's working properties and the mechanical requirements for effective edge weapons. The manufacturing techniques used for bell beaker copper objects required knowledge that extended beyond simple hammering and annealing to encompass casting methods that could produce complex shapes with consistent quality. At sites like Los Millars in southeastern Spain, archaeologists have uncovered workshops containing stone molds designed for producing standardized dagger forms, along with crucibles and furnace installations that could achieve the temperatures necessary for reliable casting operations. The workshop's organization suggests that production followed systematic procedures that could maintain quality control while meeting demand from communities across extensive territories. The stone wrist guards that form another characteristic element of bell beaker assemblages served practical functions related to archery while also functioning as status symbols that identified their wearers' participation in shared cultural traditions. These rectangular stone plaques, typically measuring 8 to 12 centimeters in length and perforated with holes for leather fastenings, protected archers' forearms from bowstring impact during shooting. The careful shaping and polishing required for their manufacture, combined with their frequent inclusion in high-status burials, indicates that archery had acquired social significance that extended beyond simple hunting or warfare applications. The rapid spread of bell beaker material culture across Europe coincided with significant changes in settlement patterns and social organization that suggest fundamental transformations in how communities organize their economic and political relationships. Unlike earlier European cultures that typically maintain stable territorial boundaries over extended periods, bell beaker communities appear to have been highly mobile, establishing new settlements while maintaining connections with distant regions through kinship networks or alliance relationships that could span hundreds of kilometers. Archaeological evidence from sites like Amesbury in southern England demonstrates the international connections that characterized bell beaker society. The famous Amesbury archer, discovered in 2002, was buried around 2300 BCE with an assemblage of over 100 objects including copper daggers, gold ornaments, stone wrist guards, and pottery vessels that reflected influences from across Europe. Isotope analysis of the individual's teeth indicates that he had grown up in the alpine regions of Central Europe before migrating to Britain, where he was buried with grave goods that demonstrated his elevated status within the local community. The corded ware culture, which emerged slightly earlier than the bell beaker phenomenon around 2900 BCE, played a crucial complementary role in transmitting copper technology across Central and Northern Europe through different mechanisms and social structures. Named for the distinctive cord-impressed decorations on their pottery, corded ware communities established settlements across territories stretching from the Rhine Valley to the Volga River, creating cultural connections that span the entire European continent from west to east. The copper objects associated with corded ware assemblages demonstrate technological capabilities that developed independently from bell beaker traditions while achieving comparable levels of sophistication. Corded ware metalworkers specialized in producing shaft-hole axes that required advanced casting techniques for creating the complex internal cavities needed for hafting. These axes, typically weighing 200 to 400 grams and measuring 12 to 18 centimeters in length, represented significant improvements over earlier European copper tools in terms of both effectiveness and durability. The megalithic monuments that appeared across Atlantic Europe during this period demonstrate the organizational capabilities that copper-using communities had developed for coordinating large-scale construction projects. Sites like Stonehenge in England, Carnac in Brittany, and Newgrange in Ireland required the mobilization of hundreds of workers over extended periods, along with sophisticated planning that could coordinate the transport and positioning of massive stone blocks weighing several tons each. The construction of these monuments coincided with the spread of copper technology, suggesting connections between metallurgical innovation and the social developments that made monumental architecture possible. The relationship between megalithic construction and copper-using communities extends beyond simple chronological correlation to encompass evidence for the specialized tools and organizational systems required for monumental projects. At Stonehenge, archaeological investigations have revealed copper and bronze tools that were used for shaping sarsen stones and creating the precise joints required for the monument's trilithon structures. The tools show evidence of intensive use and frequent resharpening, indicating that metal implements had become essential equipment for stonework activities that would have been impossible with earlier technologies. The evidence for social stratification in Copper Age European burials extends beyond simple wealth accumulation to encompass the emergence of warrior elites whose status derived from their military capabilities and control over copper weapons. At Remedello in northern Italy, cemetery excavations have revealed graves containing elaborate assemblages of copper daggers, axes, and halberds that were clearly designed for combat rather than ceremonial display. The weapons show evidence of use wear patterns consistent with actual fighting, while their sophisticated metallurgy indicates that warrior groups had access to the finest products of contemporary metalworking technology. The hill forts that emerged across temperate Europe during the later Copper Age demonstrate sophisticated understanding of defensive architecture and strategic positioning that reflected the military innovations that copper weapons had made possible. At Maiden Castle in southern England, the earliest defensive earthworks date to around 2500 BCE and incorporated multiple lines of ramparts and ditches that could channel attacking forces into killing zones where defenders could maximize the effectiveness of their copper-tipped spears and arrows. The technological innovations and social transformations that had swept across European communities during the spread of copper working created new pressures and opportunities in the mountainous regions that separated the expanding cultural zones. The Alpine regions, with their rich copper deposits and strategic position controlling trade routes between northern and southern Europe, became focal points for competition that would generate some of the earliest evidence for organized violence in European prehistory. The discovery of Otzi the Iceman in 1991 provides an unprecedented window into the violent realities of life during this transformative period. The man who became frozen in time died around 3300 BCE on a high alpine pass at an elevation of 3,210 meters, carrying equipment that reveals the sophisticated technological capabilities and complex social relationships that characterized mountain communities during the Copper Age. His copper-bladed axe, the oldest complete example ever discovered, demonstrates metallurgical expertise that combined advanced casting techniques with innovative hafting systems designed for the specific demands of alpine environments. The axe blade, measuring 9.5 centimeters in length and weighing 224 grams, was cast from copper containing trace amounts of arsenic that enhanced its hardness and durability compared to pure copper implements. The metal's composition at 99.7% pure copper indicates sophisticated ore selection and processing techniques. Chemical analysis of the copper used in Otzi's axe reveals something remarkable. The metal originated from ore sources in southern Tuscany, approximately 400 kilometers from where his body was discovered. This distance indicates that alpine communities had established trade relationships that could transport finished copper objects across challenging mountain terrain, requiring organized transport systems and established exchange networks that connected different valleys and cultural groups. The circumstances of Otzi's death provide direct evidence for the violent conflicts that were affecting alpine communities during this period. An arrowhead embedded in his left shoulder, fired from below and behind, indicates that he was fleeing uphill when struck by his pursuer. The wound severed major blood vessels, causing rapid blood loss that led to his collapse and death on the mountain pass. The position of the arrow and the trajectory of the shot suggest that his attacker was an experienced archer familiar with mountain warfare tactics, capable of making accurate shots under difficult conditions while pursuing a fleeing target across rough terrain. The equipment carried by Otzi reveals preparations for extended travel through dangerous territory, suggesting that mountain journeys during this period required careful planning and defensive capabilities. His unfinished bow, carved from yew wood but lacking the final shaping needed for use, indicates that he was in the process of replacing damaged equipment, possibly after earlier encounters with hostile groups. The 14 arrows in his quiver, only 2 of which were completed with flint points and feathers, suggest that he had been involved in combat that depleted his ammunition supplies. DNA analysis revealed traces of blood from at least 4 other individuals on Otzi's equipment. 1 on his knife, 2 on a single arrowhead from his quiver, and a 4th on his coat. These findings suggest that Otzi had recently been involved in violent encounters, possibly killing 2 people with the same arrow that he was able to retrieve on both occasions. The blood on his coat may have come from a wounded companion he carried, or from his own involvement in close combat. The evidence paints a picture of ongoing conflict in the alpine regions, with Otzi either participating in or fleeing from violence in the days before his death. The mystery of why Otzi's killer didn't retrieve the valuable copper axe has puzzled researchers. Such an axe represented enormous value, both as a functional tool and as a symbol of status. The fact that it remained with the body suggests several possibilities. Perhaps the killer was interrupted or feared discovery, or perhaps taking the axe would have identified him as the murderer. The axe's presence has led some researchers to suggest that Otzi's death may have been part of a ritual killing or execution rather than simple robbery. The territorial conflicts that led to Otzi's death were part of broader patterns of violence that affected alpine regions during the transition from the 4th to 3rd millennium BCE. Archaeological evidence from fortified settlements throughout the Alps indicates that communities were investing substantial resources in defensive preparations, constructing palisades, earthworks, and stone walls that could protect against organized attacks by rival groups. At Urban Plaza in Switzerland, excavations have revealed a lakeside settlement surrounded by defensive structures that incorporated copper-tipped stakes and other metallurgical innovations designed to maximize defensive effectiveness. The competition for control over alpine copper sources created conflicts that extended beyond simple raids to encompass systematic attempts to dominate resource extraction and distribution networks. The Mitterberg mining complex in Austria, which supplied copper throughout Central Europe, shows evidence of intensive exploitation during this period. Mining shafts extended over 100 meters into mountainsides, with sophisticated ore processing installations that could handle large quantities of raw materials. The scale of these operations required coordinated labor forces and defensive capabilities that could protect valuable installations from attacks by competing groups. The evidence for organized violence in alpine regions includes not only individual cases like Otzi but also mass casualty events that document the escalation of territorial conflicts during this period. At Sparnschletz in Austria, archaeologists uncovered the remains of over 60 individuals who had been killed during a systematic attack on their fortified settlement around 3300 BCE. The victims showed evidence of traumatic injuries inflicted by copper axes, arrows, and blunt force weapons. The absence of valuable objects from the site suggests that the attack was motivated by territorial conquest rather than simple raiding. The weapons technology that enabled these conflicts included innovations that adapted copperworking techniques to the specific requirements of mountain warfare. Alpine copper axes typically featured longer handles and heavier heads than their lowland counterparts, providing the leverage needed for effective combat in rocky terrain where traditional weapons might be damaged by impact with stone surfaces. The hafting systems used for these weapons incorporated multiple binding techniques that could maintain integrity under the stress conditions of mountain combat. The social organization required for maintaining defensive installations and organizing military expeditions in alpine environments created new forms of leadership that differed from the kinship-based systems that had governed earlier mountain communities. Archaeological evidence suggests that successful war leaders could accumulate followers and resources that enabled them to establish territorial control over entire valley systems, creating the first examples of centralized political authority in alpine regions. Ötzi himself appears to have held an elevated position within his community. The quality and sophistication of his equipment, including the valuable copper axe, the carefully crafted leather clothing made from multiple animal species, and the advanced bow and arrows, all suggest a person of high status. His clothing was particularly elaborate, with a coat made from goat and sheep hide, leggings of the same materials, and shoes made of bearskin and deer hide with grass padding for insulation. This attention to equipment quality and the care taken in selecting and matching different materials point to someone with access to substantial resources. The tattoos on Ötzi's body, 61 in total, positioned primarily over joints and areas showing signs of arthritis, suggest that he had received medical treatments that may have been available only to individuals of high rank. These marks, created by rubbing charcoal into small incisions, correspond to acupuncture points, indicating that alpine communities had developed sophisticated medical knowledge that combined empirical understanding with ritual or spiritual practices. The long-distance trade relationships that supplied alpine communities with essential resources created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile groups seeking to disrupt enemy supply lines. The high-altitude passes that provided the only practical routes for transporting goods between valleys became strategic choke points where small forces could intercept much larger trading expeditions. The isolated location where Ötzi died suggests that he may have been attempting to use a little-known route to avoid such interception attempts. The violent mountain conflicts that claimed Ötzi's life represented only one facet of the broader transformations reshaping European society during the late 4th and early 3rd millennia BCE. While alpine communities struggled for control over strategic passes and copper sources, the Iberian Peninsula was witnessing the emergence of some of Europe's most sophisticated prehistoric settlements, characterized by architectural innovations and metallurgical achievements that would establish new standards for defensive construction and technological development across the western Mediterranean. The Los Millars culture, centered in the arid landscapes of southeastern Spain, developed between approximately 3200 and 2200 BCE into one of Europe's most complex prehistoric societies. The eponymous site of Los Millars, situated on a triangular plateau overlooking the Andarax River Valley, demonstrates urban planning concepts that surpassed contemporary European achievements while incorporating defensive innovations that would influence fortification design throughout the Mediterranean world for centuries to come. The settlement's builders constructed massive stone walls that enclosed an area of nearly 5 hectares, incorporating 13 semicircular bastions that projected outward from the main defensive line to provide overlapping fields of fire against potential attackers. The construction techniques employed at Los Millars reveal sophisticated understanding of military engineering principles adapted to local geological conditions and available materials. The defensive walls, reaching heights of up to 4 meters and widths of 3 meters at their base, were built using carefully selected limestone blocks that were shaped and fitted without mortar, creating structures that could withstand both siege weapons and seismic activity common in the region. The bastions incorporated internal chambers that could store weapons and supplies while providing protected positions for defenders to coordinate their responses to attacks from multiple directions. This design represents a significant innovation in prehistoric military architecture, anticipating defensive concepts that wouldn't become standard until much later periods. The sophistication of these fortifications suggests that Los Millars builders had either learned from bitter experience with warfare or had access to architectural knowledge developed elsewhere and adapted to local conditions. Archaeological excavations within the Los Millars settlement have revealed a complex urban layout that integrated residential areas, craft workshops, and storage facilities within the defensive perimeter. The houses, constructed using stone foundations supporting mud brick walls, followed standardized plans that maximized space efficiency while maintaining structural integrity under the stress conditions created by the region's frequent earthquakes. The largest structures, positioned near the settlement center, contained multiple rooms with specialized functions, including copperworking areas, pottery kilns, and storage chambers that could accommodate the surplus production that supported the community's specialized craftsmen. The metallurgical workshops at Los Millars produced copper objects that demonstrate technical capabilities rivaling contemporary achievements in the Eastern Mediterranean while developing distinctive regional characteristics that reflect local innovations and preferences. The site's metalworkers created sophisticated casting installations that could produce complex objects, including flat axes, tang daggers, and ornamental items that required precise temperature control and advanced understanding of metal flow properties. Chemical analysis of copper artifacts from the site indicates that craftsmen were working with ores from multiple sources, including local deposits in the Sierra Nevada and imported materials from more distant regions. This diversity of raw materials suggests that Los Millars had established extensive trade relationships with communities throughout southern Iberia and potentially beyond, positioning itself as a major center for copper production and distribution. The copper mining operations that supplied Los Millars and related settlements transformed the economic landscape of southeastern Iberia through the establishment of specialized mining communities that developed innovative extraction techniques adapted to local geological conditions. At Cerro Virgin, located approximately 15 kilometers from Los Millars, archaeologists have uncovered extensive mining installations featuring vertical shafts that extend over 20 meters below ground level, connected by horizontal galleries that followed or veins through the surrounding rock formations. The mining operations incorporated sophisticated ventilation systems that maintained air circulation in deep workings while removing dangerous gases that could accumulate in confined spaces. The organization of these mining operations required administrative capabilities that could coordinate activities across multiple sites while maintaining quality control standards that ensured consistent ore grades and processing efficiency. Archaeological evidence indicates that mining communities established permanent settlements near major extraction sites, complete with residential areas, workshops for tool production and maintenance, and storage facilities for processed or awaiting transport to manufacturing centers. The presence of standardized copper ingots at these sites suggests that mining operations followed established procedures for ore processing and quality assessment that enabled systematic distribution to different workshops and trading partners. The warrior elites that emerged within Los Millars society developed military capabilities that reflected both the wealth generated by copper production and the defensive requirements created by competition for control over mining territories and trade routes. Elite burials from the site contain elaborate assemblages of copper weapons, including daggers with ivory handles, ceremonial axes with decorative elements, and archery equipment that demonstrates the integration of metallurgical innovation with military technology. The weapons show evidence of actual combat use alongside their ceremonial functions, indicating that Los Millars elites were active participants in the territorial conflicts that characterized the period. The fortification systems that protected Los Millars and related settlements incorporated defensive innovations that responded to evolving military technologies and tactical approaches developed by competing groups throughout the region. The outer defensive line, located approximately 650 meters from the main settlement, consisted of a series of small circular forts positioned to control access routes while providing early warning of approaching enemies. These outposts, connected to the main settlement through a sophisticated communication system using signal fires and horn calls, enabled defenders to coordinate their responses to attacks while maintaining control over the surrounding agricultural areas that supplied the community's food requirements. The trade networks that connected Los Millars with communities throughout the Western Mediterranean created commercial relationships that extended far beyond simple resource exchange to encompass cultural transmission and technological diffusion across vast distances. Archaeological evidence indicates that Los Millars merchants maintained regular contact with communities in North Africa, establishing trading posts and commercial relationships that facilitated the exchange of copper objects, ivory, ostrich eggshells, and other luxury materials that enhanced the status and wealth of Iberian elites. The North African connections maintained by Los Millars communities are documented through the presence of African materials in Iberian archaeological contexts and the appearance of Iberian-style objects at sites along the Mediterranean coast of Africa. These exchanges required organized trading expeditions that could navigate the challenging waters of the Strait of Gibraltar while maintaining commercial relationships across cultural and linguistic boundaries. The burial practices that developed within Los Millars society reflect the sophisticated social stratification and elaborate ritual systems that characterized this culture at its height. The famous tholos tombs, large circular chambers constructed using carefully fitted stone blocks and covered by earthen mounds, served as collective burial sites for elite families over multiple generations. These monuments required engineering capabilities that combined architectural knowledge with sophisticated understanding of structural mechanics and geological conditions. The grave goods found within these collective tombs reveal the international connections and sophisticated material culture that characterized Los Millars elites during the height of their cultural development. Copper objects include not only locally produced items but also imports that demonstrate contact with communities throughout the Mediterranean basin, while ivory carvings, gold ornaments, and exotic stone materials indicate access to luxury goods from Africa and other distant regions. Around 2200 BCE, signs of stress began appearing at Los Millars and related settlements throughout southeastern Iberia. Many sites show evidence of abandonment during this period, with defensive systems falling into disrepair and populations dispersing to smaller settlements or migrating to entirely different regions. The causes of this decline remain debated, but likely involved a combination of environmental changes, resource depletion, and disruption of the trade networks that had sustained these complex societies. The sophisticated achievements of Los Millars culture represented the culmination of over 2 millennia of copperworking innovation across Europe and the Mediterranean, but by 2200 BCE, environmental and social pressures were creating conditions that would fundamentally transform metallurgical technology and reshape ancient societies. The discovery of tin-bronze alloys, which had been developing gradually through experimental additions of various metals to copper, was reaching a critical threshold where the superior properties of bronze would begin to revolutionize both military technology and everyday tool production across the ancient world. The earliest systematic production of tin bronze appears in the archaeological record around 2500 BCE at sites scattered across Anatolia and the eastern Mediterranean, where metalworkers had been experimenting with various additives to copper for centuries. Unlike the arsenic copper alloys that had dominated earlier periods, tin bronze offered consistent properties that could be reliably reproduced, provided craftsmen had access to tin sources and understood the precise ratios needed for optimal performance. At Kultepe in central Anatolia, workshops dating to this period contained crucibles with residues showing tin concentrations of 8 to 12%. The optimal range for producing bronze that combined maximum hardness with workability for complex casting operations. The technical advantages of tin bronze over pure copper were immediately apparent to craftsmen who gained access to the new technology. Bronze tools maintained sharper edges for extended periods, resisted corrosion more effectively than copper, and could be cast into more complex shapes without the brittleness problems that had limited earlier alloy experiments. The procurement of tin presented challenges that would reshape trade networks across the ancient world, as tin deposits were far less common than copper sources and often located in regions that were difficult to access or politically unstable. The primary tin sources available to ancient metalworkers included deposits in Cornwall, Bohemia, and Central Asia, requiring trade relationships that spanned thousands of kilometers and crossed multiple cultural and political boundaries. At Ugarit on the Syrian coast, tablets dating to around 2000 BCE document tin shipments arriving from distant sources, with merchants paying premium prices for materials that were essential for bronze production but available only through complex international trade networks. The transformation of existing copperworking centers to accommodate bronze production required significant investments in new equipment and technical training that many communities struggled to afford during a period of increasing environmental stress and political instability. The social implications of bronze technology extended far beyond simple improvements in tool quality to encompass fundamental changes in military organization and political power structures throughout the ancient world. Bronze weapons provided decisive advantages in combat situations, as bronze swords could penetrate leather armor that had been effective against copper weapons, while bronze-tipped arrows achieved greater range and accuracy than their copper predecessors. The communities that gained early access to bronze technology could establish military dominance over their neighbors, creating incentives for territorial expansion and political consolidation that would characterize the early Bronze Age across multiple regions. The horse domestication that reached full development during this transition period created new possibilities for both military organization and long-distance trade that would prove crucial for maintaining the supply networks needed for bronze production. Unlike cattle or sheep, horses could carry riders across vast distances while maintaining speeds that enabled rapid communication and coordination between distant communities. At Bedtime in Kazakhstan, archaeological evidence dating to around 3500 BCE includes horse bits, corrals, and processing areas that document early attempts at horse management, though full domestication wouldn't be achieved until later. By 2000 BCE, domesticated horses had spread across much of Eurasia, transforming both warfare and transportation. The combination of bronze weapons and horse-mounted warfare created military capabilities that enabled small, well-equipped forces to dominate much larger populations that lacked access to these technologies. The Sintashta culture of the Ural steppes, dating to around 2100 to 1750 BCE, provides the earliest clear evidence for spoke-wheeled chariots pulled by teams of horses. These vehicles, found in elite burials along with bronze weapons and elaborate horse gear, represent a revolutionary development in military technology that would spread rapidly across the ancient world. The chariot warfare that emerged during this period required not only bronze technology and horse domestication but also sophisticated social organization that could train specialist warriors, maintain expensive equipment, and coordinate complex tactical maneuvers during battle. The warrior aristocracies that emerged to control these technologies would come to dominate Bronze Age societies across Eurasia, establishing new forms of political organization based on military prowess and control over advanced weaponry. The population movements that accompanied these technological and military changes included both voluntary migrations seeking access to tin sources and trade routes, and involuntary displacements caused by military conquests and environmental pressures that made traditional territories unsustainable. The bell beaker culture, which had spread copperworking technology across Atlantic Europe during previous centuries, began to fragment around 2300 BCE as communities adapted to changing conditions through different strategies. Some groups intensified their participation in long-distance trade networks to maintain access to tin supplies, while others developed local alternatives or reverted to simpler technologies that could be sustained using available resources. The Indo-European language dispersals that many linguists associate with this period may have been facilitated by the military advantages that bronze technology provided to expanding populations. The environmental factors that contributed to social transformations during the transition to the Bronze Age included climate deterioration that reduced agricultural productivity across much of Europe and Western Asia, creating food shortages that intensified competition for the most productive territories. The 4.2 kilo-year event, documented in paleoclimatic records from ice cores and lake sediments, brought cooler temperatures and reduced precipitation that stressed agricultural systems adapted to the warmer conditions of the previous millennium. These environmental pressures created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by groups possessing superior military technology, while forcing traditional communities to develop new survival strategies that often involved abandoning established settlements and territorial boundaries. The widespread collapses that affected numerous societies around 2200 BCE, including the abandonment of Los Millars in Iberia, the end of the Cucutini Tripilia megasettlements, and disruptions throughout the eastern Mediterranean, may all be connected to this combination of climate stress and technological transformation. The collapse of traditional political systems during this transition period created opportunities for innovative forms of social organization that would characterize early Bronze Age societies. The palace-centered bureaucracies that would emerge in Mycenaean Greece and other Bronze Age civilizations represented new approaches to managing the complex supply chains and military organizations needed for bronze production and territorial control. These administrative systems incorporated innovations in record-keeping, resource management, and diplomatic relations that enabled centralized authorities to coordinate activities across extensive territories while maintaining the international relationships needed for accessing essential raw materials. The technological innovations that emerged during this transition period extended beyond metallurgy to encompass advances in transportation, communication, and military organization that would define Bronze Age civilization for the next millennium. The development of spoke-wheeled vehicles enabled more efficient transport of heavy materials over long distances, while improvements in shipbuilding technology facilitated maritime trade relationships that connected distant regions through regular commercial exchanges. At Uluburun, off the Turkish coast, a shipwreck dating to around 1300 BCE contained tin ingots, copper oxide ingots, and finished bronze objects that document the international scope of Bronze Age trade networks. The craft specialization that had developed during the Copper Age reached new levels of sophistication as bronze production required coordination between different specialists, including miners, smelters, casters, and finishers, who each possessed essential technical knowledge. The training systems needed to transmit this knowledge created new forms of social organization based on craft guilds and workshop hierarchies that transcended traditional kinship relationships. The legacy of Copper Age innovations in social organization, trade networks, and technological development provided essential foundations for Bronze Age civilizations that would dominate the ancient world for the next 1,000 years. The administrative systems developed for managing copper production and long-distance trade created models for the palace bureaucracies that would coordinate Bronze Age economies, while the military technologies and organizational structures that had emerged during the Copper Age transition provided templates for the professional armies that would characterize Bronze Age warfare. The urban planning concepts pioneered by Harappan civilization, the defensive architecture innovations of Los Millars culture, and the metallurgical expertise developed across Europe and the Mediterranean during the Copper Age all contributed to the technological and social foundations that enabled Bronze Age societies to achieve unprecedented levels of complexity and territorial control. The trade networks that had connected copper-producing regions with manufacturing centers and consumer markets evolved into the international commercial systems that would facilitate Bronze Age prosperity while creating the diplomatic relationships and cultural exchanges that would characterize ancient Mediterranean civilization. The transformation from copper to bronze technology marked more than a simple improvement in metallurgical capabilities. It represented a fundamental shift in how human societies organized themselves for production, warfare, and territorial control. The Copper Age had introduced humanity to the possibilities and challenges of metal technology while creating the social structures and international relationships that would prove essential for managing the more complex requirements of Bronze Age civilization. The innovations in mining, smelting, casting, and alloying that had developed over 2 millennia of copper working provided the technical foundation for bronze production, while the trade networks, administrative systems, and military organizations that had emerged during the Copper Age created the institutional framework that would enable Bronze Age societies to exploit the full potential of their superior metallurgical capabilities. As we reach the end of this extensive journey through the Copper Age, we've witnessed transformations that fundamentally reshaped human civilization. From the earliest cold hammering experiments at Keonu around 7000 BCE to the emergence of sophisticated bronze technology by 2000 BCE, these 5,000 years witnessed innovations in metallurgy, social organization, trade networks, and military technology that established foundations for all subsequent civilizations. The story of copper's discovery and development reveals humanity's remarkable capacity for observation, experimentation, and innovation. Those ancient craftsmen who first noticed that certain green-tinged rocks behaved differently under the hammer couldn't have imagined that their curiosity would cascade through millennia, transforming every aspect of human life. The metal they began to work would reshape social relationships, enable new forms of economic organization, facilitate territorial expansion, and generate wealth disparities that fundamentally altered human communities. We've seen how copper technology evolved from simple cold hammering at Anatolian sites to sophisticated smelting and casting operations that required specialized knowledge, complex supply chains, and coordinated labor. We've witnessed the spectacular wealth accumulation at Varna, where grave goods containing more gold than existed in all other contemporary sites combined revealed the stark social stratification that copper technology enabled. We've observed how Mesopotamian temple institutions integrated metallurgical production with irrigation, agriculture, and religious authority, creating administrative capabilities that would define urban civilization. The Harappan achievement of unprecedented standardization in weights, measures, brick sizes, and alloy compositions demonstrates that sophisticated social organization doesn't require monumental architecture or obvious centralized authority. The bell beaker and corded ware cultures showed how technological knowledge and cultural practices could spread across vast distances through human migration and exchange networks. The violent death of Otzi in the Alpine passes revealed the deadly competition for control over copper sources and trade routes. Los Millars' sophisticated fortifications illustrated how metallurgical wealth generated both prosperity and conflict. The transition to bronze technology that culminated this era required even more extensive trade networks, more complex social organization, and more sophisticated military capabilities. The addition of tin to copper, creating superior bronze alloys, necessitated international commercial relationships spanning continents. The concurrent development of horse domestication and chariot warfare created new forms of military power that would reshape political organizations across Eurasia. The widespread collapses around 2200 BCE, including climate deterioration documented in paleoclimatic records, forced communities to adapt or perish. Those that successfully navigated this transition emerged with new forms of palace-centered bureaucracies, professional military organizations, and international trade networks that would characterize Bronze Age civilizations. The legacy of the Copper Age extends far beyond its immediate achievements. The administrative systems developed for managing metallurgical production provided templates for governing complex state institutions. The trade networks established during this period evolved into the international commercial systems that would connect Bronze Age civilizations. The military technologies and warrior aristocracies that emerged during the Copper Age established patterns of organized warfare that would persist for millennia. Perhaps most significantly, the Copper Age demonstrated humanity's capacity to transform available resources through technological innovation, creating entirely new possibilities while generating unprecedented challenges. The social stratification, territorial conflicts, and environmental pressures that accompanied copper technology would recur throughout subsequent history as each technological transformation created both opportunities and disruptions. As we conclude this exploration, we're reminded that technological change never occurs in isolation. Metallurgical innovations intertwined with developments in agriculture, trade, warfare, religion, and social organization, creating complex feedback loops that drove further changes. The craftsmen who shaped the first copper tools were simultaneously shaping human societies, establishing patterns that would influence development for thousands of years to come. Thank you for joining this deep exploration of humanity's Copper Age. If you found this journey through ancient metallurgy fascinating, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more in-depth historical content. Your support enables us to continue creating these comprehensive explorations of human history.